The Medicare Cash Program. How government-set medical prices harm America. The United States Constitution was signed on September 17, 1787. The powers of the U.S. Congress are listed in Article 1, Section 8. A primary purpose of the federal government was to maintain an army and navy to protect the country from foreign attack. The 10th Amendment provides that all powers not listed in the Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people. This limitation of federal powers is known as the doctrine of enumerated powers. The signers of the Constitution were influenced by the ideas of Scottish economist Adam Smith, who published an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations in 1776. The same year as the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson echoed Smith's belief in free markets and limited government when he said in his first inaugural address that a wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government. Smith argued that a system in which prices were determined by free market competition would result in wealth and prosperity. Smith wrote that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. By allowing people to compete in free open markets, they would be led by an invisible hand to promote the wealth and prosperity of society. Smith was very suspicious of business people. He knew that businesses would petition the government for regulations, licensure, tariffs, and favors that would benefit them at the expense of their competitors. Smith wrote that the proposal of any new law or regulation of commerce ought always to be listened to with great precaution, and ought never be adopted till after having been long and carefully examined, not only with the most scrupulous but with the most suspicious attention. No economic theory has been so strongly and convincingly vindicated by history as the free market principles of Adam Smith. When the United States adopted a competitive market system based on property rights, sound money and low taxes, and free of government regulation and licenses, the United States quickly became the most prosperous country in the world. After the Russian Revolution, nationalization of industry and agriculture and government price controls destroyed the economy of Soviet Russia. In 1921, Lenin's Bolshevik Party adopted what it called the New Economic Policy. This policy allowed farmers to operate in a competitive free market and to keep some of their profits. The policy worked like magic, resulting in huge increases in agricultural production. Joseph Stalin abolished the New Economic Policy in 1928 in favor of collectivization of agriculture. Collective farming resulted in the collapse of agricultural production and the disastrous famine of 1932 and 33. Wikipedia estimates that 6 to 13 million people died as a result of collective farming in the Soviet Union. China under Mao Zedong also implemented policies of forced collectivization of agriculture. According to Wikipedia, collective farming was a disaster for the Chinese people. Nearly 30 million people died of hunger in the Great Chinese Famine which resulted. China was among the poorest countries in the world in 1980, when Deng Xiaoping gained control of the Communist Party of China. Deng instituted market reforms similar to the new economic policy of the Soviet Union, which allowed farmers and others to compete in a market economy and to retain part of their profits. As a result of these reforms, China has rapidly become one of the richest countries on earth. The Fraser Institute and the Heritage Foundation publish annual lists which rank the countries of the world based on measures of economic freedom. Rankings are based on property rights, levels of taxation and regulation, and the soundness of the country's money. The prosperity of a country correlates closely with its fidelity to the classical liberal free market principles described by Adam Smith. According to the 2017 Economic Freedom of the World report, the economically freest country was Hong Kong, followed by Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, Ireland, the United Kingdom, Mauritius, Georgia, Australia, Estonia, Canada, and the United States. Thomas Jefferson wrote that the natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. Since 1847, the American Medical Association has lobbied state legislatures to license doctors and to reduce the number of medical schools. According to an article by the Mises Institute, the AMA succeeded at shutting down over 40 medical schools during the first half of the 1900s. The AMA, with one of the largest lobbying budgets of any U.S. organization, has worked over the years to limit competition from non-physicians, to prevent advertising and bargaining by physicians, and to set uniform fees for medical procedures. According to an article in Forbes, the AMA has been very successful at increasing the income of physicians, with U.S. doctors making twice as much as their peers in other developed countries. Government control of U.S. health care continued at an accelerated pace in the 1900s, with tax laws favoring group health insurance and state laws outlawing medical underwriting of group health insurance policies. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson signed the Medicare and Medicaid laws, putting the federal government in charge of health care for three large groups of Americans: the elderly, the disabled, and the poor. Initially, Medicare physicians were paid on the basis of their usual, customary, and reasonable fees. When this vague standard led to abuses, Medicare and the AMA created a way to set the prices for over 7,000 tests, procedures, and other services that doctors perform. Like the catastrophic attempts of the Soviet Union and China to set prices, the Medicare physician fee schedule, implemented in 1992, has had disastrous and lethal unintended consequences. Medicare has given the job of assigning the relative values of the 7,000 plus medical services that Medicare pays physicians for to a committee of 31 doctors called the AMA Specialty Society Relative Value Scale Update Committee, or RUC for short. Most of the 31 doctors on the committee represent a particular specialty, including, for example, an anesthesiologist, a cardiologist, a dermatologist, a family medicine doctor, a general surgeon, a geriatric medicine doctor, and so on. The RUC meets 3 times a year for 3 or 4 days each time at a Chicago hotel and other resort hotels. The RUC debates and votes on revisions of the relative values of different medical procedures based on the time a procedure takes to perform, the difficulty of the procedure, the skill required, and other debatable factors. According to an insider, the RUC process for setting fees is highly political, with battle lines and alliances drawn between specialties. An AMA Physician's Guide states, "From the AMA's perspective, the RUC provides a vital opportunity for the medical profession to continue to shape its own payment environment." A 2013 article in Time reported that many healthcare policy experts have long known that the AMA group, known as the AMA Specialty Society RVS Update Committee, RUC, contributes massively to the illogical and inflated way that healthcare prices are set. A position on the ruck may carry enormous power. If, for example, the single cardiologist on the ruck were to successfully lobby for high prices for angioplasty stent procedures relative to prices for counterpulsation therapy or for diet and lifestyle treatment programs for angina, hospitals would have incentives to open more cath labs, and doctors would have incentives to become interventional cardiologists, even if studies showed that diet or counterpulsation therapies were more effective. Unlike a competitive market that reacts instantly to changing information, the prices of inserting angioplasty stents remain high despite the fact that stents can be implanted much more easily and quickly than in the past, and despite the fact that there is now convincing evidence that stents for stable coronary artery disease do not prolong life or prevent future heart attacks. With Medicare patients largely indifferent to the cost of competing medical treatments, it's much easier for hospitals and physicians to recommend treatments that are profitable for providers but fail to treat the cause of a chronic disease. Imagine if car repair prices were set the way prices to repair people are set. Rather than relying on market competition to set prices, 31 expert auto mechanics representing various specialties, oil changes, bodywork, transmissions, mufflers, and so on, would get together and divvy up billions of dollars appropriated by Congress for auto repairs. Would it be a surprise if such an absurd and corrupt system stifled innovation, destroyed efficiency, and resulted in runaway price increases? Since the 1950s, insurance companies have been increasingly prohibited from offering healthy people lower premiums. A tiny group of AMA doctors has been empowered to set the cost of competing medical services, and patients are often recommended to spend taxpayer money on expensive operations when low-cost nutrition and lifestyle programs would be more effective. Government control of healthcare hasn't worked. High costs and epidemics of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and Alzheimer's have been the result. There's a simple way to reform U.S. healthcare, which would end most of the fraud, waste, and overtreatment in the Medicare program, improve the quality of care, and combat the epidemics of chronic disease afflicting America. Medicare should stop setting medical prices and paying hospitals, doctors, and other medical providers directly. Instead, Medicare should be like Social Security. Each senior should be paid a sum of cash and allowed to buy their own insurance and medical services. Insurance companies should be free to offer people in good health lower premiums. Medicare currently pays over $10,000 per senior per year. Instead, Medicare might give each senior a check for $8,000 every year on their birthday. The vast majority of seniors could buy a good catastrophic health insurance policy with a high but affordable deductible for much less than $8,000. Funds not needed for the insurance policy could be used for other healthcare needs, and unneeded funds carried over to future years and given away at death if not used. Medicare money would belong to the senior and could be spent by the senior for health care or other purposes. This Medicare Cash Program should be administered by the 50 states. The U.S. Constitution does not authorize the federal government to run the healthcare system, and the 10th Amendment prohibits it from doing so. Health insurance companies would compete in a free competitive market. They would be free to set premiums based on weight, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and so on. They could require a medical checkup, and non-renew a policy or change the premium on its anniversary, for example, annually. Medicaid and state risk pools would provide a safety net for people who did not qualify for insurance at affordable rates. By reducing fraud, waste, and overtreatment, uninsurable people could be treated more generously and compassionately than at present. A competitive market would foster innovation. By requiring participation in an obesity or diabetes reversal program believed to be effective, an insurance company might be able to offer lower premiums and attract a large group of loyal insureds. Medicare and Medicaid suffer from amazing levels of fraud. By official estimates, $60 billion of Medicare's $600 billion annual budget is lost to fraud, waste, abuse, and improper payments each year. A 2012 article in Forbes reported that visits to the addresses of 1,600 of Medicare's durable equipment suppliers found that nearly 1/3 of the businesses didn't even exist. Yet these non-existent businesses had billed Medicare for $237 million. Criminals use rental mailboxes to bill Medicare, and these fake bills are paid without bothering to verify them. ABC News reported that Medicare continued to pay the fraudulent bills, though it had known for years about the fraudulent billing problem. Despite the staggering amount of outright fraud in the Medicare program, doctors and hospitals treating chronic diseases with drugs, tests, and surgeries, and ignoring nutrition and prevention programs costs Medicare far more. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that the vast majority of healthcare expenditures are for chronic conditions, especially heart disease and stroke, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. These and other chronic diseases can often be treated and reversed by nutrition and lifestyle programs. Because of the financial incentives of both patients and providers, effective low-cost prevention and reversal programs are often ignored. Milton Friedman often pointed out that people spend their own money much more carefully than they spend other people's money, for example, taxpayer money. With taxpayers footing the bill, patients have little incentive to economize or to find cost-effective alternatives. Patients would question expensive tests and treatments if they were paying the cost out of their own Medicare funds, or if their insurance rates could be raised. Compared to paying tens of thousands of dollars for angioplasty and stents, a diet and lifestyle program such as the Ornish program would be a much better alternative for many people with stable coronary artery disease. With Medicare setting prices and paying the bills, hospitals and other providers have no ability or incentive to compete on the basis of price. Healthcare has been shielded from market forces that keep prices reasonable in competitive industries. Hospitals and doctors paid on a fee-for-service basis have strong incentives to recommend expensive tests and treatments, and to ignore low-cost nutrition and prevention programs. Government pricing and patient indifference to cost has created what the Journal of the American Medical Association calls the perfect storm of overutilization. Perverse pricing incentives and overutilization are the most important contributors to the high cost of U.S. healthcare. How much waste is there in the U.S. healthcare system? 30%, 50%, or 80% may be lost to fraud and overtreatment. The United States spends almost 2.5 times as much per capita as the average developed country. But most of these countries have bureaucratic government-run systems with rampant waste and inefficiency. While the exact amount of waste is incalculable, it's possible that over 80% of spending is wasted. Consider the following hypothetical. A patient complains to his doctor of chest pain. After tests, the diagnosis is stable coronary artery disease. The doctor recommends enrolling in the Medicare-covered Ornish Intensive Cardiac Rehabilitation Program, a program that reports excellent long-term compliance. After 18 4-hour sessions, the patient adopts a whole food vegan diet and a program of moderate exercise. The angina goes away. Blood pressure, blood lipids, and blood sugars improve to ideal levels. Inflammation and plaque in the coronary arteries reverse. The new lifestyle protects the patient not only from heart attacks, but also from strokes, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, obesity, colon cancer, lung cancer, and other diseases. The patient is free of medication and hospitalization and dies at home at the age of 99. Now suppose that the doctor, instead of recommending the Ornish program, recommends that the patient schedule an angiogram. 2 stents are implanted. The patient assumes the problem is fixed and continues eating a diet of foods with added fats, oils, salt and sugar, refined grains, and animal foods. The angina returns. More stents and eventually bypassed graft operations are performed. The patient develops type 2 diabetes and is later diagnosed with colon cancer. Numerous drugs, office visits, and surgeries are required. The patient dies of Alzheimer's at 84 after many years in a nursing home. In this hypothetical, how much did the unnecessary angiogram cost? 30%? 50%? 80%? The cost to the healthcare system and the patient are, of course, incalculable. Medicare price setting destroys the ability of providers to find and implement medical services that improve quality and lower cost. To be paid by Medicare, you use a CPT, current procedural terminology code, assigned by the AMA. It may be difficult or impossible to get paid without a CPT code. Also, an NCD, National Coverage Determination, may be required by Medicare. Government agencies are typically taken over by the industry they regulate. With Medicare's price-setting power, the medical industry, hospitals, doctors, and other providers, can delay and prevent innovations that threaten the status quo. It reportedly took Dr. Dean Ornish 16 years to get approval for Medicare to pay for the Ornish Cardiac Rehab Program. If Medicare money was paid directly to seniors to purchase medical services, innovation could revolutionize healthcare and bring down prices dramatically. Many chronic diseases can be treated with diet. Suppose a healthcare provider wanted Medicare to pay for a new program to convince seniors to adopt a healthy whole food diet. Healthcare workers would go into a patient's home and pack up all the unhealthy foods. Foods with added fats, oils, sugar, salt, or refined grains, and animal foods for donation or disposal. Patients would be taken shopping and shown how to choose a diet of vegetables, beans, fruit, oatmeal and other whole grains, nuts, seeds, spices, tea, and a variety of whole foods. Weight, blood pressure, blood sugars, and blood lipids would be monitored. Such an innovative program might be able to reverse chronic diseases, save lives, and reduce Medicare costs. Unfortunately, this program, or any other medical innovation, is difficult to implement as long as Medicare sets prices and requires years to approve new treatments. According to a 2018 International Monetary Fund report, the United States is one of the few countries whose national debt exceeds its gross domestic product. According to the Weekly Standard, the utterly unprecedented debt disaster we confront in the coming years is a function of an explosion of health entitlement costs and especially Medicare costs. The program's current trajectory would swallow up the federal budget, and taxes could not be raised high enough, fast enough to keep up with its growth without crushing the economy. The current system of government pricing and regulation is creating a nation of overweight diabetic adults and children. To add injury to injury, these children will be liable for a national debt caused by government-run health care and amazing levels of fraud and overtreatment. Anyone who doubts that diet can prevent, treat, and reverse many of the chronic diseases that kill most Americans should read Dr. Michael Greger's amazingly well-documented book, How Not to Die: Discover the Foods Scientifically Proven to Prevent and Reverse Disease. The book is also available as an audiobook at libraries and bookstores. The book examines 15 leading causes of death and shows how a vegan whole food diet can prevent, treat, and reverse many chronic diseases. Dr. Joel Fuhrman's books, The End of Heart Disease and The End of Diabetes, also available as audiobooks, show how these diseases can be treated with nutrition. A convenient vegan whole food diet is described online at denver-diet.com. During the 2008 presidential campaign, Obama promised that we will lower premiums for the typical family by $2,500 a year. Investor's Business Daily published an article on September 23, 2015, titled, "Health Premiums Have Climbed $4,865 since Obama promised to cut them $2,500. Many progressives believed that Obamacare would reduce premiums because administrative costs would be lower with government insurance than with private insurance. This is not true. Fraud and waste in government is huge compared to administration, including profits, in private insurance. Obamacare failed to change the real causes of high healthcare costs. Costs will remain high as long as prices are set by Medicare and the American Medical Association, as long as patients have no financial stake in the choice of treatments, and as long as fraud in government remains high. The proposed Medicare Cash Program would create enormous savings by reducing fraud and overtreatment by changing patient incentives. Medicare would not set medical prices. Patients would use their own money, though given to them by Medicare each year, to buy insurance and services in competitive markets. Prevention would be favored unless costly treatments had proven value. Patients would be led by the invisible hand of market pricing to better options. The Medicare Cash Program would create strong financial incentives for people to eat right, exercise, stop smoking, and get healthy. A generous safety net would be available for people who could not afford insurance in a competitive market. Hopefully someday at least one state will be allowed to set up a Medicare Cash Program based on free market medical prices and a free competitive health insurance market. Such a test would result in huge savings, much better health care, and much better health for Americans.